Hello, everybody. I'm quite surprised that there's so much interest so late in the afternoon, but it's most probably because of the very interesting topic that our speaker is going to present. Just to reassure you, the talk will be recorded, and theoretically you can also participate online in a comfortable chair downstairs, just if you cannot stand anymore, quite literally. Okay, so let's get started. I'm very pleased to introduce Joe Peill, as I learned. Peill. Damn it. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience with Pharmacology from the University of Nottingham and a Master's of Science in Translational Neuroscience from Imperial College in London. Having worked in clinical research for the last 5 years within various human health areas, including oncology, rheumatology, and mental health, he has gained substantial knowledge in clinical trial management and coordination. He's currently working as clinical trial manager at the Center for Psychedelic Research. His interests lie in the acute psychedelic experience and novel mental health treatments. I'm very pleased to welcome you to your talk, Psychedelics and the Inner Healer, Myth or Mechanism.
Working? Yeah, cool. Hi guys, great to see you all here today. My name's Joe, and I'm a clinical trial manager at Imperial College London, the Center for Psychedelic Research, and I'm interested in the acute psychedelic experience. I've written a paper on psychological insight, but today I'm going to talk to you about the inner healer and whether it's myth or whether it could potentially have mechanistic action. Just go on that? Yeah. Okay, cool. Cool. Awesome. It's working now. Okay, good. Working now. Just quickly to go over what I'm going to talk about today. So I'll discuss a short history of the inner healer and where I think it might have come from. How we measured the inner healer in one of our studies at Imperial College London. Whether or not the inner healer is therapeutically meaningful, and finally onto limitations and future directions that we might want to consider. So up on the board here at the moment is just some quotes from one of our studies. And what you'll see is a general pattern of healing that some of our participants have discussed after their psychedelic experience. And within that, there's kind of fundamental core concepts that we already kind of not fully understand, but we know of. So that might be insights, a greater understanding for oneself, thoughts, feelings coming to the surface during the experience, realization of disconnection or more connectedness, gaining compassion for oneself, and then also the therapeutic environment, including the therapists, the music, the guides, all working together to prepare this kind of internal environment, enabling kind of a journey and a healing process. So first of all, what we wanted to think about was, what is the inner healer? And there's probably loads of different definitions out there for what the inner healer is, and everyone has different thoughts about what it might be. But we kind of broke it down into 3 core components. So the first being an automatic healing process that the participant is engaging in. Also, the body and or mind being involved, and there's a positive directionality to it. So I'll quickly take you through a short history of where I think the inner healing theme originated from. So yoga being about 5,000 years old, meditation even older than that. Within these spiritual practices, what we see is a kind of emerging property of movement towards positive psychological growth and a healing theme coming through. And that's kind of inherent, I think, to the human condition. We're seeking this positive psychological growth. And that's maybe where these practices actually originated from, is that kind of seeking behavior, right? And then moving forward into sort of the late 1800s, early 1900s, psychotherapy came through, And we see within psychotherapy the notion of uncovering the unconscious, trying to understand ourselves better, and also trying to heal ourselves, right? And then moving into the sort of late 1900s, the inner healer was first mentioned within a study that was looking at healing prayer to help with mental health disorders. And then into sort of the 2000s, it was brought into psychedelic research as well. And within kind of psychedelic psychotherapy, within this paper at the bottom, you can see that the inner healing intelligence is starting to be mentioned, and it's also brought through with quotes from participants and therapists within studies. One of the examples that's given for the healing, this kind of healing concept, is that as an infant we have DNA, a blueprint for development of our emotions, of our mental capacity, physical capacity as well, and spiritual sort of thriving. But what that requires is an adequate environment to be able to thrive, right? And we know that that environment isn't always there. The correct environment isn't possible. And that's where psychedelic research comes in, where hopefully we're able to create kind of a greenhouse, a container that's conducive to healing and help with this development of our emotional and psychological capacity that we might not have fully developed. However, the problem with this is at the moment it sounds quite pseudoscientific, right? So what we wanted to do was more rigorously test this within one of our studies. So within the depression study at Imperial College London, which was looking at psilocybin to help treat depressed individuals, what we did was we wanted to investigate the inner healer further. So I'll just give a quick overview of what the overview of the study was. So what we had was patients split into two groups. One group given a high dose of psilocybin, so 25 milligrams, and then the other group, a placebo or 1 milligram. And then after 3 weeks, the same again within both of the same groups. And we wanted to investigate the inner healer by asking this specific question, which is, I felt like my body, mind, brain was healing itself automatically, naturally, by itself. And this was asked directly after dosing day one, so with all of the other acute measures, like you might ask for emotional breakthroughs, mystical type experiences, and so forth. And this question was asked using a 5-point Likert scale score from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And what we found was that there were significantly higher inner healer scores for those who were the higher dose of psilocybin, so the 25 milligram group. And then those who took the placebo were more likely to disagree with these inner healer, this inner healer scores, and also, or maybe were more sort of neutral to this idea. And then what we wanted to look at was whether or not the inner healer scores correlated with depression scores at 2 weeks post first dose. And this is what we found. We found that there was a significant correlation between inner healer and depression scores at this time point, specifically using the Beck Depression Inventory. And then what we wanted to do was just see if by controlling for intensity scores, this still held true. And we still had significant correlations with inner healer scores and depression scores at 2 weeks, even controlling for these intensity scores. So that means that the intensity isn't necessarily affecting that. Then we moved on to some exploratory analysis, and specifically looking at the acute measures. And what we found was that there were significant correlations with emotional breakthrough inventory, and also mystical type experiences that participants were having. However, there were no significant correlations with altered states of consciousness, with challenging experiences, and importantly, there weren't correlations with suggestibility or expectancy, which to me suggests that there's this kind of emerging property with the inner healer in that participants, even if it wasn't necessarily that the priming led to greater inner healer scores. And just to break that down a little bit more, I went into the specific items for the emotional breakthrough and whether these correlated with inner healer scores. And what we found was that the majority of them did, apart from one, which was this fourth item you can see on the board here. If you're not familiar with the emotional breakthrough inventory, it's an 8-item scale score, and all of the items are here on the board. But this doesn't really tell us too much, right? But what was more interesting was when we looked at the mystical type experience questionnaire. I've only got, because the mystical experience questionnaire is a 30-item scale, I only put the ones on the board that are specifically correlating with inner healer scores. And those were feelings of positive mood, so this like tenderness, this gentleness, peace and tranquility. And also the noetic quality to the mystical type experience. So people who are encountering ultimate reality, gaining insightful knowledge. But also ineffability, so the inability to be able to communicate your own experience after the psychedelic experience itself. And I think that could lead to some good discussion points after as well. So yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on some of those. But the acute psychedelic state, we kind of, I think, seem to have started breaking it down into all of these different facets and components. I think that the emotional breakthrough and mystical type experience warrants further investigation. Although we're seeing some positive correlations with the inner healer scores, I think this really needs to be nailed down. But also we weren't able to look at insight, we weren't able to look at connectedness either, given that these were, the data that was collected for these was after dosing day 2, so you've got a confounder coming in there with the second dosing day. And I think further research would be great to have a look into that. So is the inner healer myth, or does it have some sort of mechanistic action? Well, at the moment, it's just a single item questionnaire that we implemented. So we've got low construct validity here. What we need to do is create a multi-item scale, which I'll go on to talk about in a second. But also maybe looking at the post-acute inner healer. You know, we know that we have post-acute insight following, We know that we have post-acute insight following the psychedelic experience. And that's most likely through integration processes, but also like, you know, what happens over the days, weeks as the participant internally. Are there kind of inner healing coming through in this post-acute stage? But most importantly, what is like the biological action, and are there any neural correlates to the inner healer scores? I think I'd be inclined to kind of lean towards the salience network, given that this has functions to do with homeostatic regulation and also interoception. And as I mentioned before, with some of the spiritual practices, say yoga, meditation, we know that some of the core concepts of this rely on interoception, so our awareness of our body and focusing on different parts of our body. And we know that that is related to therapeutic value following these practices. I think that'd be an interesting avenue to explore. But also some of the computational models. Where does this fit in with the entropic brain hypothesis and the brain's energy landscape? Now, I've talked about the inner healer for most of this presentation so far, but I think it's so important to keep into account the outer healer, the nurturing environment that we're providing through the therapists, the music, or also the hidden therapist, the plants, the lighting, the architecture, that all play this pivotal role in providing an environment, a greenhouse, to be able to help heal the participant. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be an automatic healing process. I think there's complex interactions that are going on there. And something I think really worth mentioning is some of the priming that could occur beforehand. So even, say, in the media or with preparation before psychedelic experiences, if we're saying to participants come into a study thinking, I'm going to be automatically healed, and then they have a negative experience, then what could that lead to? That could lead to feelings of uselessness. It could lead to feelings of being broken and not quite right, feelings of guilt and shame. And that's not what we want to do. But also kind of bringing in, I think, therapeutic alliance as well into that. So I just briefly want to touch on how we could potentially expand the inhaler. And this is taken from our anorexia study, which Hannah talked about earlier today. Here what we're wanting to tap into is the fundamental interaction between the internal sources and the external sources that I mentioned briefly in the last slide, and also how passively or actively participants are engaging in this healing process. So thanks very much, guys. I wanted to also thank all the people who were involved with the depression study, because without them, I wouldn't have been able to do this presentation. I wouldn't have been able to look at any of the data for it, but also those who gave important insights and ideas into the inner healing concept and where we could potentially go with it for future studies. I also draw your attention to this podcast, which is Psychedelics and the Inner Healing Intelligence, if you want to further look into it. And I'll just leave you here with some of the quotes and ideas from some of the people from our group, just to maybe spark some interest and maybe spark some ideas of maybe what we want to discuss now in the question part of the talk. Thank you.
So thank you, Joseph. As I now see, maybe we move one slide back because there were several people trying to take a picture of the podcast.
Guys. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I rushed through that one.
And thanks to your timely presentation, we now have plenty of time for discussion and questions. So, it might be a bit challenging, but I have some assistants in the rear that might also help handing through a microphone. Maybe you first, because that's going to be easy with the microphone, if there is one. Yeah, we have one. So would you be so kind and just hand it to the back?
Thanks. All right, so thanks, Joe. Yeah, this is really fascinating work. I'm not convinced it's the kind of work, though, that's going to dispel this aura of pseudo-scientificness around the idea of the inner healer. For the simple reason that, you can quantify this really rigorously, but what you're quantifying is people's perceptions that there's an inner healer. And so if you find that predicts, all the therapeutic benefits and whatever, it's still equivocal between these two hypotheses, that there really is an inner healer that's doing the work, or that, somehow people thinking there's an inner healer does the work. So I guess I wonder, first of all, if you agree with that. And secondly, I guess what to my mind would start to dispel that aura of pseudo-scientificness is some kind of mechanistic theory, some theory about how there actually could be a system or tendency or whatever within the brain or other part of the body that does have this, sort of telos, if you like, this automatic drive towards restoring the mind and brain to some sort of balance. And I kind of think that the entropic brain might be an interesting direction to look for that, but I wonder if you want to respond to either of those things.
Yeah, so I think the inner healer is a very broad concept. And, a lot of people from coming out of the studies could describe it as a healing process that might be automatic, but maybe through deep kind of phenomenological discussion with participants following their experience, we might actually break down that as to exactly why it was, right? So people could talk about feelings that they got within their body during the experience, or insights that they got throughout the experience as well. So it might not necessarily be that the inner healer is this specific construct, something as specific as, say, emotional breakthroughs, right? But it's more of an overarching kind of outcome from those facets of the psychedelic experience. And whether or not it's automatic is another question.
Cool, thanks.
Thanks.
So there's another question. I'll try to hand through the microphone.
Thank you very much for your really interesting talk. I think especially regarding trauma therapy, it's a very important step for kind of leaving this role of the victim. And I was wondering, in body psychotherapy, there are like some people that are recognizing that the safer the environment, that the person in therapy is going where they need to go intuitively to heal their, for example, adverse childhood events. And I was wondering if you have any measurement of that, the subjective sense of safety in the setting, according to the intensity of the inner healing presence or perception.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think if we can quantify the external environment around participants, right? So the music, architecture, it's something that we're actually moving towards with some of our studies. And if we're able to kind of quantify that as to like how, and maybe come up with an idea of how comfortable participants are during the experience, then maybe we could relate that to their healing process. But everyone's so specific as well, right? Everyone's so unique. So, for example, in our clinic, at the Cyprus Clinic at Imperial College London, we have some quite interesting art on the wall, right? It's our own clinic, so we've been able to bring in all of our own art, and we've set up the clinic in kind of Scandinavian, I'd say, kind of style, so very minimalist. And for some people, that's great. But then for other people, they come out of their experience and they say, that art was just too much for me, right? So it's really a difficult one, and maybe that requires more kind of discussion with the participant beforehand as to what environment for them would work better. And that's where you bring it in with the preparation sessions as well. But within clinical studies, there's a limit as to how much you can do. You couldn't just like kind of, take down all the art and put in hundreds of pounds worth of new art and change the architecture of the whole place. So it's difficult to do. Like there's limitations within clinical studies that prevent you from doing that. But no, it's a really interesting thought. Thanks. Yeah.
Also, like you said, comfortable, and maybe comfortable is not the thing that we're going for, but the safety to go to an uncomfortable place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the important direction I think you're taking the research. To me, it always seemed that, or it seems that an important aspect of the inner healer is that it's following its own type of wisdom that cannot be understood right away, as such that you put an intention and then the journey takes you completely elsewhere. So I was wondering if you would incorporate that in future questionnaires or so.
Could you expand on that a little bit? Sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Like it occurs that before a dosing and a journey, one sets an intention of what one wants to achieve, and then the journey takes one completely elsewhere, as was expected, and revelation is not entirely, clear, and becomes clearer maybe later, maybe not. So I understood that this is a part of the inner healer concept, that you don't follow exactly what this inner healer wisdom, is really trying to do in all cases.
Yeah. And I completely hear you with it kind of following a completely different path. Like, a lot of people set up like intentions, but then this kind of, your mind is taking you automatically into this other place. But to be able to kind of measure that, I'm not really sure how we'd be able to do that. I think there's such kind of complex interactions that are going on with like the external environment and the internal environment, with participants, and it's maybe understanding the participants before, within the preparation sessions, to be able to guide them to maybe an intention that really works for them, that could work. Yeah.
Last two questions.
Thank you. So I was wondering about the relationship between this inner healer and dealing with trauma. Then how does that, in your opinion or experience or the data that you have looked at, how is that related? Because my intuition or observation is that the effect of psychedelic experience is in confronting what you usually avoid. So I'm wondering whether there's something to this mechanism, like trauma, anxiety, avoidance, and then the psychedelics would reverse that process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, so it's really difficult to answer that, given that I don't work with that many people with trauma, so I don't know how it could potentially kind of relate to this like inner healing intelligence.
A trauma in the broad sense also, as in adverse events in childhood that can be potentially, well, adverse. So
Yeah. And I'm sure that kind of comes into it, and in that, you know, this is a kind of like automatic process that we believe is occurring and may be coming through because of that childhood trauma, I guess. But I think for me, I'm also interested to see whether, like, how much of an impact that and the interactions between that kind of external environment and that kind of automatic healing process, are we able to kind of measure that intrinsically, right? So that's what we're kind of trying to do with our next scale that we're implementing. Is are we? And I'll go back to that actually if I can. Yeah, so looking at the kind of fundamental interaction between those internal and external sources. Yeah.
Okay, and the last one, and you have the microphone, perfect.
Hey, thank you very much for an interesting talk. I'm not so sure what to make of it. So it seems that it might be very important to understand the origin of this concept of the inner healer. Psychedelics are very notorious for causing people to believe in the existence of things that they experience under the effect of psychedelics. And I'm not actually sure if, as a cultural concept, the inner healer existed before psychedelics were broadly available. But I'm also curious, is it your intuition or thought that perhaps this is a useful concept, that, for example, MAPS, this is all over their treatment manual, whereas I think many psilocybin studies do not use it. So just more of a pragmatic question there.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think I'm interested in the kind of the concept of it being an emergent property, right? So I mentioned before with like spiritual practices like meditation and yoga, it seems to be that this healing process is something that's not necessarily intentional. It seems to kind of follow an emergent property as you kind of practice more. And that's, I think, where it might come into the psychedelic experience, in that this like kind of emergent property is coming through kind of a spiritual practice. I hope that kind of answers your question there.
Yeah, there's other ways of describing it, which is like having an open mind and accepting what's coming up and trusting, let go, be open. But this sort of personifies it in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much once again, Joseph.
Thank you.